And welcome to an hour with the candidates on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian National Committee. Joe Bishop, Henchman, Chairman. As always, John Gapso is on the big board, and I'm your host, Pat Ford, the proud chairman of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. As always, we have several purposes for this show. We want to give the entire worldwide libertarian community an opportunity to meet our incredible down-ballot candidates. We want to challenge our down ballot candidates to discuss what we always refer to here as lunch pail, down to earth, community, economic, philosophical, educational issues through the prism of the libertarian philosophy and the libertarian statement of principles. Of equal importance is to give voters, as well as Libertarian Party members, an opportunity from around the country to meet, to greet, to get to know, to get a little insight on the folks who are the Libertarian Party, the libertarian philosophy standard bearers for this next generation. I remain convinced that one of the folks that we've spoken to within the last year will in the coming years be a candidate for the presidency of the United States. I'm convinced that some of the candidates that we've spoken to in the past year will in fact become sitting members of the United States Congress. And I already know that members who've sat with us in this past year that we've been on the air are changing the world as we know it, whether it be Shane Hazel and his incredible run in Georgia and the campaign he's beginning to mount for the gubernatorial race, or any one of the number of town council mayoral candidates who are giving regular folks who may never have met a libertarian in their entire life, and certainly never been, remember, we never use the word governed, never seen the stewardship of a libertarian involved in, well, managing, if you will, the arms of government in their respective community. So it's critically important that we get to know these folks and we support them. I, as your host, remain convinced that the ultimate patriotic act, if you will, in America, beyond serving our armed forces in defense of our nation, is in fact running for office. And we know already, based on cities like Burnsville and up and down California and in West Virginia, the impact that libertarian stewards of our communities have had already on the quality of life and the perspective of the individual living in those communities. This is kind of a quiet time typically during the electoral process, but we do have special elections going on. And sometimes they come up at the oddest times. We had John Phillips, who's of course famous for being on the LNC, one of the consciences, if you will, the political party we all share. And he, of course, is running, well, for a local office, town council office. His town happens to have off year and off month elections. Kind of interesting. Gentleman joining us tonight is going to be running, and I believe next week we have an individual who'll be joining us, will be running in very special elections because of resignations, illnesses, sometimes indictments, sometimes outright arrest. We'll let him tell the story. Joining us tonight is Stephen R. Harris. It's important. There are a lot of Stephen Harrises out there, but there is only one Stephen R. Harris. He's running to be the mayor of Hutto, Texas. He's the former vice chair of the Texas Libertarian Party. Stephen, welcome to an hour with the candidates, also known as Candidates Corner.
Glad to be here, Pat. Thanks for the invitation.
And thanks for your service to the party as well. When you're the vice chair of a state as enormous, as complex, as nuanced as Texas, you're wearing a lot of hats. And yet we've seemed lately to have a number of folks like yourself who've occupied positions of great responsibility within the big L, the Libertarian Party, take it upon themselves to either during or immediately after that term of service to run for office. So tell us a little bit about yourself. And, we always ask for what that libertarian moment is, when that light bulb went above your head and you realize, oh man, it ain't going to be easy. I'm going to be a libertarian. And at the same time, what motivated you to run for a critically important position like mayor?
Well, that's two complex questions. I'll start with my libertarian story. Interestingly enough, I was a card-carrying libertarian right out of high school, and that was 1992.
Wow.
And so my parents were conservative Democrats. They didn't know it, but they were pretty libertarian. But they were fed a bunch of labor union uh, content all the time, so they thought they were Democrats. Um, but I knew I wanted something different. I knew growing up that the government shouldn't be involved in people's lives because the government never helps. The government only seems to hurt. So yeah, right out of high school, I started paying dues. That didn't last long because I was broke, but and I didn't get involved in the Libertarian Party for a long time. When I did get involved into politics, I was in my 30s and was focused on one mission, and that was getting rid of our congressman at the time, and that was a tough road. And I helped several Republican campaigns, and like the fourth campaign that I worked on, the candidate won. Uh, so I accomplished that mission. The whole time I was part of the libertarian wing that helped the Republican Party. I was very vocal about my libertarian views. Was very active with the Tea Party in my area, and the Tea Party in my area had a FM broadcast radio show, and I was able to co-host the radio show several times. The regular host was very libertarian as well, and we had a great time talking about libertarian philosophy and the overreach of government when the two of us were hosting together. So that was a fun time. So fast forward, I moved down here to Austin, the Austin area, about 6 years ago, and joined the Libertarian Party again, and immediately got involved. We joined the state. I was elected to the state executive committee, and then this when there was an absence for vice chair, the executive committee selected me to be the interim vice chair, and then I was elected at the convention after that.
Well, that's outstanding. Bear with me, folks. I've got a bit of a cold tonight. First of all, you've got the voice for radio, and I already can tell you instill what is probably a tumultuous subject for folks who are either red state or blue state Texas. I have a feeling you instill sort of a sense of confidence and quiet strength there, if you will, into a movement that is known for being a little bit mercurial. So that's great stuff. What issue for you personally resonates? I mean, for someone like yourself, you're about to come upon your 20th anniversary, if you will, of being a libertarian. That's pretty good. You've been around for a significant part of the party's existence. Was there one issue that really speaks to you on a daily basis?
My focus has changed over the years. I used to be very concerned about the federal, and the federal overreach is still a huge problem, but I'm less concerned about that personally now. There are other people who still have that passion, and I encourage them to focus on their passions. Then I was more involved at the state level, and I would go to the Capitol in Austin every year and lobby for libertarian ideals. And if you're not aware, Texas legislature is very behind when it comes to libertarian principles. We still don't have constitutional carry. Uh, Recreational cannabis use is still illegal, and that's an issue that I'm very concerned about. But my big focus is on local politics, the city and the county. The city and county taxes impact most of us more than our state and federal. Um, Low income families, especially, they don't get impacted much by the income tax. They get most or all of their income tax back in the form of a refund. So they should be most concerned with the local taxes. The property taxes in Texas are outrageous. In my city, in particular, our property taxes are going through the roof. I'm afraid of what our appraisals will be in the coming year because the home prices in the Austin area are skyrocketing, and we're not going to be able to sell because we're not going to be able to afford to buy a replacement home.
You bring up a critical point, and that is the importance of local office to folks. Fair to say that you've already discovered both through your, if you will, your activism at the state house. And by the way, how many hours does it take you to, or how far away is your state house?
Well, when I was most active at the state level, I was 3 hours away. I've
Hmm.
lived in the Austin area only 6 years, and
Hmm.
now when with Austin traffic, it can be an hour or it can be 2 hours.
Wow. So you've seen the importance of local activism, yet at the same time, you recognize the importance of being able to tie in the state connection to, if you will, whether it be the unfunded mandates you get from the state, educational funding formulas you get from the state in many places, and of course, as you pointed out, the very variety of perspective that Texans have on issues that affect libertarians. One of them I would also imagine to be the death penalty. Um, Texas
Yes,
does not seem to be extraordinarily kind towards life, um, as you and I would define it as libertarians. The Let's talk about Hutto.
certainly.
It's to me, I'm going to let you tell the story, but this is seeming to be, I wouldn't even call it in slow motion, but literally a tech explosion that's happening on a daily basis before your eyes. Talk about the relationship with the burgeoning high tech belt that's grown out of Austin. Ironically, with Dell being, I believe, one of the first companies to really to bring that home,
Certainly.
and how that's affected your community.
Certainly. My day job as is at Dell Technologies,
Hmm.
and Dell is in another neighboring suburb of Austin in Round Rock, and not in Austin proper. So many of the tech companies that are fleeing the West Coast are moving to the Austin area. It has become a hub for tech. It's been a hub for startups for many, many years. And what we're seeing in Hutto is the urban sprawl and now if you, because I'm from Texas, I'll use a Texas reference. If you look at the DFW Metroplex, you can't tell when you leave one city and go into another for about a 3 or 4 hour drive
Wow.
from one side of the Metroplex to another. And if this area around Austin is going to look like that in the next few years with the rapid growth. Uh, the city of Hutto is one of the second fastest growing city in the state for several years in a row. We went from a population of around 1,200 people to now almost 30,000 people in a matter of about 12 years.
Wow.
And so that kind of rapid growth creates tremendous issues for a city. And I give a lot of grace to previous city councils who couldn't keep up with the infrastructure demands. There's no way a city council could have kept up with that type of growth. So what my focus is going to be is, keep moving the ball down the road, keep playing the game, keep striving to get caught up with the infrastructure, and do the best we can to do so with a financially responsible manner.
You highlight one of the central challenges in America today, whether it be the litigious nature of government, whether it be the mission creep that government engages in on a routine basis, even at the what I call the hyper local level, the technology that's involved, the urban planning that has become part of the job. And when you look at municipal government, and this includes and particularly includes municipal school boards, what we're asking folks to do is somehow bridge that gap, that enormous gap between being, regular folks connected to the community, part and parcel of the community. By that, I mean being involved in schools, churches, civic organizations, kids' activities, being part of all that, yet at the same time, maintaining the technical skills or at least being smart enough to work with people on those technical skills to essentially be able to react and manage and hopefully anticipate the needs of a community going through explosive growth. How hard is that to do?
Well, the growth is the biggest challenge. And I'm not saying growth is the only challenge because cities that are declining have their own challenges as well.
Mhm.
But but when a city's growing as fast as Hutto, The infrastructure is the obvious problem, but there's also the problem of uh, revenues, and I don't like property taxes, but Texas is heavily dependent upon property taxes. So, how do we stimulate more economic development, and that translates into sales tax revenues so that we can continue to reduce and wean ourselves off the property tax revenues? There's a number of ways to do that. And the libertarian idealist would say, well, just get rid of the government, and you don't have to worry about taxes. That'd be great if every voter in the city of Hutto was a libertarian and we could all come to that conclusion. I'd support that, but that's not the case. So I have to do what the voters want me to do, and that is manage their funds and their tax dollars appropriately. People ask me, libertarians ask me all the time, because I'm the current chairman of the board for the Hutto Economic Development Corporation, and the EDC gets tax revenues. We get a sliver of sales tax revenues, and we're responsible for spending that to stimulate economic growth. Why? How can a libertarian spend tax
Right.
dollars? Isn't that a problem? And my answer is always, who else do you want spending your tax dollars? Do you want a libertarian who's going to be more responsible and look for private sector solutions
Mhm.
to spend those dollars on, or do you want someone else who is going to just grow the size of government and do everything within the means, the size of the government?
Right. And let's talk about economic development because that's the methodology, the way revenues are collected to fund it, the way winners and losers are often picked,
Hmm.
again represents. I guess the word of tonight is challenge. When you've got, I'll just very briefly describe a situation here in Rhode Island where I live and work, and you've got folks the tax dodge, that what I call here the grift of the year now, is claiming that these office parks, these stadiums that are being built don't cost the taxpayer a dime, because what they're doing effectively is redirecting sales tax revenue, very often it's sales tax revenue, towards the debt service of a particular project, which is often dominated by one player. Um, Very often that's referred to as TIF style financing. You have a
Hmm.
district,
Yep.
and it's interesting because they can often play games with the size of the district. One being proposed right now in a nearby city, the city of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, is of course now it appears that the size of the tax collection district, if you will, is significantly larger than the actual community that we're paying debt service for. How are folks approaching projects like that? Is Hutto engaging in projects? I read briefly about, I'll call it a field of dreams. There's a famous author in economic development who has something called what he calls the field, wrote a book called The Field of Schemes. This appears to be one of these gigantic baseball campuses. Tell us a little bit about that. Are you involved with that? And how is that being stewarded through the community?
So unfortunately, that deal turned out. I think it's a dead deal. That I think that would have been a great benefit to the city, and it was just from the very beginning, the city and the developer there was some mismanagement and really poor communication from both directions, and I think that deal is gone. So, but to get to the meat of your question, we do have in this area PIDs, public improvement districts, and TERS. Um, and one of the things that you have to watch out for as a city leader is when a developer comes to you and they have a proposal for a public improvement district, and they say we're going to have a 5-story hotel, and we're going to have an amenity center for the community that's Olympic sized pool, etc. Those plans, those promises rarely come to fruition.
Mhm.
The hotel ends up being multifamily home instead of a hotel that generates tax revenues, um, and the pool becomes a splash pad or something like that.
Right.
So they overestimate their promises, because the valuation is based upon their promise, and they can go out and get bonds issued for their public improvement district based upon the
Right.
promise. They
Hmm.
don't have to deliver unless the city holds them accountable.
Hmm. So is the type of projects that are being built in Hutto, and let's compare that to what the public perception at large, the national perception of a city like Austin. We think of Austin as sort of Texas's Portland, Oregon. Keep Austin weird.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is Hutto much more of a corporate nature than Austin, or is now this sea, if you will, of corporate players that are literally parachuting into Austin, changing the character there? And what type of relationship do they have with economic development?
So Hutto doesn't have those big corporate tech companies here yet. I think they're coming, and not just the big names that you know of, but all of those big names that are moving to Austin. They have suppliers, they have parts that need to be manufactured, and we're happy to take those widget manufacturers and put them here in Hutto so that
Mhm.
they have a short drive to get from here to their the plant where they're selling their wares. So I'd rather have 4 or 5 $100,000 manufacturing facilities than a giant 1 million square foot facility any day. Because if that 1 million square foot facility decides to close, it's a hard building to replace, a hard building to fill again.
Mhm.
It's much easier to refill a 100,000 square foot
Right.
building than a giant building.
So you very much, Hutto, I'll call it the Bentonville effect. And if folks aren't familiar with that, Bentonville, Arkansas, of course, is the home of Walmart. And Bentonville has become, if you will, a company town. And it's fascinating because ringing that town is every hotel chain imaginable, every fast food joint imaginable, starting from the basic on up to the bougie hoity toity. Um, so Hutto aspires effectively to be a satellite community of Austin in terms of a supplier base. Uh, what as that starts to happen, what type of population does that bring in, and are there pressures from other parts of the community to provide subsidized housing and Section 8 housing and a variety of middle to lower class income public housing?
Well, yeah, there's a low, not it's not a, I don't think it's going to be subsidized, but there is a affordable housing project that the city council is currently looking at. And if you look at the medium income to qualify there, most of my friends would qualify, and I think the median income to qualify to live there was something like 67,000, 65,000, something like
Yeah.
that.
Wow.
So that's not a low income. And what we consider a low income in America just surprises me, because if you go anywhere else in the world, um, the people living on our streets are making more than most of the world. So um, I have a lot of compassion for people who find themselves in need for low income homes or apartments or whatever it ends up being. The the issue I have is always, as most libertarians, if the private sector wants to build that, great. We just don't need to subsidize it. And
Mhm.
and I'm not a huge fan of subsidies of any kind. Um, that's one of the challenges. That's the rub when you are a libertarian running for local office, because I'm going to be one vote on a dais of seven, and I'm gonna I'm going to stick to my principles. I've already turned some people off because of my stance on giving taxpayer dollars to nonprofits. It's our city has a list of nonprofits that come every year, and we hear their pitch, and the city gives them money. Sometimes it's the same amount as prior, and sometimes it's less if the city budget is short. Um, yeah, unfortunately, if I'm the one who, if I get my way, those nonprofits are going to have to do fundraising elsewhere. I wouldn't force taxpayers in Hutto to fund the Innocence Project, which is a project that's a nonprofit that's very close to my heart, that helps wrongly
Right.
incarcerated people get out of prison. I'm not going to force taxpayers to support my pet project, my charity of choice, And if I give money to, even if it's a local organization that does wonderfully good work, that's the way I see it. We're forcing people who wouldn't normally support that organization, and we're forcing them to support an organization that they otherwise wouldn't.
And the answer for a libertarian is straightforward. Let's attempt to lower taxes and allow people more discretionary income to support the causes of their choice in a much more direct, economically efficient manner, i.e., stroking them a check as opposed to giving a check to someone and a little bit less of that money going to the ultimate cause. It's so much of what we preach is really fundamental common sense and, eerily enough, scarily enough, fundamental economics. Um, as important in city life, if you will, particularly now as at 30,000, you're certainly not a small town anymore, is education. Now, does Texas have an education funding formula that they use? Are you on your own as a community for schools?
So Texas has a terrible funding mechanism, and it's all based upon ad valorem taxes, what you would commonly call property taxes.
Hmm.
And I have advocated for many, many years to eliminate the property tax and do away with that system entirely. It is, in my opinion, one of the most immoral taxes that government imposes on its people. We already pay an income tax. We pay sales tax when we buy a home. There's no reason that anyone should have to pay taxes on a property that they own. And it doesn't just go to home purchases. I feel the same way about businesses who are in Texas have to pay an inventory tax
Right.
for inventory that they keep on their shelves, and
Hmm.
that's just wrong.
And
There
and
is
it's completely counter to really, again, economic common sense. I mean, you're disincentivizing people from investing in the community when
mhm.
in fact it's those investments in hard or soft assets like inventory that are the fuel for business and ultimately are the fuel for lower for local economy, as in fact that money is spread and respread throughout the community. It's really freshman college economics, and yet so many communities is it fair to say in Texas they've essentially engineered the local tax environment to be as a living, breathing disincentive to economic growth?
Yes, in many ways, that's the result. Whether that was the intent or not, that is absolutely the result.
Hmm.
um, and it's terrible. One of the worst things about property tax is you can lower the rate. The cities always celebrate when they lower the rate by 1% or one cent per thousand valuation, and it does absolutely nothing for the taxpayers because their valuation continues to go up every year. So if you lower the rate a minuscule amount and the taxpayers still see a net increase, you've done very little for your taxpayers.
Right.
It is my goal to lower the rate every single year that I'm in office,
Hmm.
uh, and I'm gonna lower it. Not just I'm gonna lower it as much as I can by law, because knowing that our valuations are skyrocketing, the city's going to still make more money if we can, even if we continue make to reduce the rate.
Excellent. Is there school choice at any level? Are there charter schools? What what
Yes.
approaches? What education? Well, as a good friend of mine in the libertarian movement calls it theft education. What
Mhm.
alternatives to theft education are there?
So yeah, in addition to the public schools, charter schools are pretty popular in Texas. Private schools are very popular in Texas, and in Texas, homeschools have the same legal protections as a private school. So the local ISD superintendent cannot come knock on your door and issue your student a citation for truancy if you've notified them that you're going to be homeschooling.
Hmm.
So you have protection as a homeschool family. Every year, we have to guard those protections from lawmakers in the Capitol because
Right.
they want to take those protections away.
It's yeah, and it's incredible. I was recently accosted, and I use that term sarcastically, but verbally accosted, if you will, by an individual. I have two daughters; they're in their 20s now. Incredibly enough, through a little bit of luck and a talented wife who's a teacher in the dreaded private sector, neither of them ever spent a day in public school ever. ever. And I was told that because I had taken my children out of the state-sponsored uh, regime, that in fact I'd hurt other students. Huh? They had explained that to me a couple of times, that logic. Um, it's interesting because, there's a new movement in nearby Arizona sponsored by the Goldwater Institute. And I tell anyone listening to the conversation to go to their website because they're an amazing organization for educational scholarships where, much like, say, healthcare, you're given a health savings card, right? You're given an educational savings card. If you remove your child from public school in certain parts of Arizona, of course, it's being rolled out slowly. Seems like we never roll out the growth of government slowly, but this one's being rolled out slowly, where people can use their education dollars, if you will, elsewhere. Yes, they
Hmm.
can opt out. Is anything like that afoot in Texas at all?
And every year or every 2 years when our legislature meets,
Mhm.
that type of idea is proposed, and every 2 years when our legislature meets, that idea fails. So we're always hopeful that we're going to get something like that. Um, I also homeschooled my kids. I have a
Mhm.
son who's now 26, and he spent 2 years in public school, and we pulled him out. And then the two children we had following that, our two daughters, they never went to public school once.
Congratulations. That's hard to do. And I never pass judgment on folks who, in my case, circumstances afforded me that opportunity. I never sit in judgment of those folks, but when you can do that, the effect is astonishing, isn't it?
I give the credit to my wife, wonderful wife, who did that schooling. I was working. Um,
So,
so
so what you're saying is we both married up, as they say in the Northeast.
absolutely.
That's great. What other issues now? You've got, and folks, if you're just joining us, by the way, what we're having here is another episode of what we call Candidates Quarter, or an hour with a candidate. Joining us on the line is Stephen R. Harris. He is running to be the mayor of Hutto, Texas, a close suburb of the greater Austin metropolitan area. We'd all hoped, I think, to visit Hutto and Austin last year. It wasn't to be, but I hope to get down there. It's one of the cities on my bucket list in America. We're going through what we call a conversation of lunch pail issues, as that impacts the voters that we're talking about. I say with love and respect that most voters in Hutto, most voters in Cumberland, Rhode Island, where I live, have never heard of Austrian economics, and they are not interested in it. I am. I believe in it. But that's a lesson for another day. When you're attempting to gain office, if you will, to put yourself in a position not of governing, but of stewardship of your community, it's important that we be able to address these issues in a direct, common sense manner to, what folks in the movement affectionately refer to as the normies, right? So it's all of these issues are critical, but we must note, of course, that when it comes to municipal government, there's pre-COVID and after COVID. How has the response been in terms of your community, in terms of everything from masking, restaurant shutdowns, to the inoculation, to the virus? Give us a picture of how Hutto, Texas, has responded to this crisis.
Sure. Texas, like most states, the governor of Texas issued his mandates, and he initially said he wasn't going to do statewide because we have a very large state and it's very diverse, and one size doesn't fit all. But he quickly recanted that and started issuing statewide mandates. Our county judge, who is the county executive in Texas, he followed suit and issued a countywide mandate, and the city leaders capitulated and did the same thing. So unfortunately, restaurants and bars and non-essential businesses were forced to close down for a short time, and then graciously the government has allowed them to
Right.
reopen slowly. And it looks like we may see some rollbacks again. We actually did see a short-term rollback where restaurants and bars who had been allowed to open up at 75% were rolled back again to 50% capacity.
Right.
So one of my goals, and again, I'm one vote of 7 on the dais. One of my goals would be to uh, rescind all of those city ordinances that were passed that restrict businesses in any way.
Mhm.
I firmly believe that business owners are smart enough to make the best decisions for themselves, their employees, and their customers. It's not the
Right.
role of government to enforce our will upon them, and I think it's wrong. So I'm going to do my best to roll those restrictions back. I,
Amen.
I I still believe, honestly believe that many businesses will keep the mask mandates, and it's their choice, and I fully support their right to do so.
Hmm.
If you go into a private business, you obey their rules.
Amen. I think there's ample room in the big picture for people who can respect this disease and the potential it has impact on the community, but also simultaneously respect the consensual nature of a mutually beneficial business relationship. Both can happen at the same time. It's I guess it's the 21st century equivalent of walking and chewing gum, but yes, both can happen. And we found here a handful of businesses that have revolted, and we found here businesses that stay open and also, well, let's just say advertise in the free market what they do to be clean and safe, and take it a positive aspect of that, as opposed to the nanny state that's the permission society is alive and well in Rhode Island. I'm imagining it is still alive and well in Texas, sadly
Yes.
enough. Want to spend a couple minutes on the campaign before we wrap it up. It's a special election. What happened there, and what are you doing to campaign in the age of COVID?
Well, the reason we have a special election is we have our previous mayor resigned, and when he stepped down by city charter, we have 120 days to fill that position. So
Mhm.
we couldn't hold the election in May, which is our normal scheduled municipal elections, and that's why we have a March 6th election.
Mhm.
So campaigning this year has not been much different than campaigning in years before. When I'm door knocking, I knock on the door with my mask on. I step back and give a homeowner space. If they open the door, most of them are not opening the doors, and we expect that. My campaign volunteers expect that. If they don't open the door, we put the door hanger on and we move on. If they do open the door, I'm happy to have a dialogue with them, and I've had some great conversations with the community from people who do open their doors.
Mhm.
If somebody's outside working in their garage or in their front yard, I'm gonna go talk to them.
How many voters, and what's it going to take to win? Are you running against a crowded field or a handful of you?
There's one other candidate.
Wow.
He is a sitting council member running for mayor, so it's almost like running against an incumbent.
Hmm.
So he's already won an election, so he's already hit that 50% threshold at least once. And totally lost my train of thought there. The number of voters. So we have, because this is a special called election, my fear is most voters are going to forget. They're going to
Right.
forget to go to the polls, even though we've got 2 weeks of early voting, and then all day voting on that Saturday. I'm afraid most people are just going to simply forget to turn out. So it's our drive to remind people, gotta go to the polls. It doesn't matter if you support me. If you don't go vote for me, I may not win.
Right.
So that's the focus, getting people to the polls, and the number of voters that I expect to turn out. And you might be surprised, in a population of almost 30,000, I expect less than 1,000 people to turn
Ooh.
out to vote, and it may be closer to 600 or 700 people that actually turn out, and that means 350 to 500 votes. It puts me in the winner seat.
Wow. Um, it's again, I sit in no judgment of no man or woman, but if there was ever a time in America when people needed, particularly people who treasure liberty, to need to get out and vote and be a positive force, and this is the important point. The difference between libertarians and let's just say other competing brands, there is no reason in the world why we can't be that positive force for good. I'll always give credit to Larry Sharp, who had that talk with me a few years back about planting the seed, uh, never arguing, never trying to win the argument,
Hmm.
walking away, having made our point plainly, and and knowing that just simple math. that a number of folks will contemplate, and we will ultimately, for one simple reason, I believe, carry the day. And that one simple reason is because we're right. That certainly helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But again, around the country, and I love your reaction to this. So many of the uh, best practices governments have been implementing are in the wake of the plague, if you will, are libertarian as hell. And on a simple level, from grab a drink and go from your neighborhood restaurant and be able to take it home and enjoy it with a meal, on up to the response and how we're responding to medical issues surrounding COVID. I mean, it's something like certificate of needs, which any, if you will, municipal or state level candidate or office holder will just roll their eyes at. Uh, if we truly had a free market going into this plague, then we would have had a far more robust medical response, simply because of the efficiencies of the free market and the extra facilities that would have been developed by people who are willing to put money at risk to support a free market medical system. Is that true in Texas?
So we've seen a lot of innovation in Texas. We've not seen a lot of innovation when it comes to distributing the vaccines or anything like that. That's still government controlled. They're issuing them as they get a supply. Uh, the innovations that I'm really happy to see is all the homeschool families.
Mhm.
Even if they are still attending the public schools, they're getting to do it from home, and teachers, that the parents are getting to interact with teachers more, and a lot of parents are realizing that the money that they're spending for their child's education isn't being well spent, and a lot of their parents are choosing to just unenroll their children from the public school and start homeschooling. Um, I just want to say, in Hutto, our school district is one of the top in the state for academics, and I think for public school, they are remarkable. I still have the same issues with a public school anyway, but if you're gonna spend money, be forced to spend money on your child's education, if you choose the public school in Hutto, I think you're gonna get your dollar's worth.
Is it fair to say that, and call me Captain Obvious, but the face of education has been changed forever because of Corona?
No doubt. It's not just because parents are seeing the light, it's because teachers, a lot of teachers don't want to return to the classroom either. The innovative teachers who are able to adapt to the new teach by videos method, there's a lot of potential for them to do private tutoring from home and make
Mhm.
extra money on the side. And I think those teachers are going to help drive the change in education permanently, in addition to the parents who are going to help drive the change permanently.
Excellent. Um, Amazing how quickly the last 40 minutes or so has flown by. Um, Again, Stephen Harris, he's running to be the mayor of Hutto, Texas, in a special election. This is the part of the show we always engage in what we call shameless self promotion. Um, let's remind people, because again, the successes in Burnsville that have been replicated in, well, California, now been replicated in West Virginia, and have been replicated in Indiana, and in so many places across the country. Imagine, if you will, if we can get Mr. Harris over this burden and install, if you will, the libertarian philosophy. That's what we're really doing here. It's not just an individual whose efforts, by the way, on behalf of the organization now are approaching 20 years, but we're actually taking an individual well steeped in the libertarian philosophy and inserting himself right into the middle of that which we seek to so desperately to change. So your support in a special election like this, where there is so much potential, special elections have just incredible opportunity for libertarians, because number one, we've got a chance to win. Number two, we've got an open stage from which to project our philosophy, and Mr. Harris is clearly well steeped in it. So tell us how people can support you, how they can send you, even in these economically challenged times. We say every week, a handful of dollars goes a long way in a community like Hutto. It also
Yeah.
goes a long way in spiritually, if you will, pumping the air, if you will, pumping the tires of a candidate who's working very hard. So lay it out for us.
Certainly. Let's start with this. The local voters don't care that I was the vice chair of the Libertarian Party of Texas, or LP Texas, for 4 years. That's not what's on their mind. What they like is that I've served the community for the last 4.5+ years. I've served on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm the current chairman of the board for the Hutto Economic Development Commission. I work in my community, and I'm there, and I've built my political resume. So anybody who's looking to run for office, start that now by getting involved and get your name known in your community. I've done the legwork. This is a winnable race because I've done the legwork. And you can support me by going to harrisforhutto.com. There's a donation link there. If you're local, we need volunteers. I'm committed to knocking on all the doors of the regular voters, the ones who turn out time and time again. But there's about 7,000 other doors that need to be knocked on, and the door hangers left, and we need volunteers to do that. The dollars are important too, because this is a special election for a term that's going to expire in 1 year. So if I win this year, when I win this year, I have to run again in just a year. And next May, I'll be on your show again talking about my race for mayor, re-election for mayor.
Excellent. If after all these shows and all these candidates we met from so many diverse backgrounds, running for offices at so many different levels, and Stephen, we've had folks here run from everything to be a commissioner of a mass transportation district on up to be the United States senator, and everything in between. But if there's a consistent formula, if you will, it's number one, having a healthy perspective about incorporating libertarian values and philosophies into day-to-day stewardship of the community's resources. Number two, the importance of getting out early as possible. In this case, a special election makes that a challenge, but you're starting at the same time as everybody else. So in a certain way, this kind of brings everybody to a particular level. The importance of fundraising, the importance of building up a campaign infrastructure where you have a manager and you have folks out there in the field working on your behalf, the importance of fundraising, what it means to get that extra few $100. So maybe you get to do a couple more runs of social media ads. Maybe you get to do a few more door hangers, how you cherish every single penny. It's a formula for success. But as you've also said, having an established relationship with your community where you have provided mature stewardship of their assets and their belonging, where you've created become a position of respect, while at the same time tying yourself to those libertarian values. You become a known commodity, and at the same time, and I believe a heroic measure, you commit to advancing our statement of principles. It's an outstanding combination. It's a winner, even when it's not a quote unquote winner, because the current generation right now of candidates is building the foundation for, I believe, much success. And Mr. Harris, I want to congratulate you on your efforts, because ultimately, for every person on social media who complains that there's no bench, when are we going to develop a bench? When are we going to put people up for office? Have a name. Well, guess what? Balderdash, it's happening right now. It's happening in Hutto, Texas. It's happening across the country. And you're part of that. How does it feel?
It feels great. I'm also excited because when I win this election, the county that I live in will have 2 libertarian mayors. The 2 of the fastest growing cities in the state, both having mayors that are libertarian. That's very exciting.
Right. And in a period of profound economic growth, yet in a period of profound challenges, in a very real sense, Austin, Texas, the greater Austin metropolitan area, is now in the national focus because of all those issues. And you do such great effort to bring this message in the manner you're doing so. So again, folks, if it's possible, and by the way, Stephen, how good does it feel when you get a check from, I don't know, somewhere else that you've never met, you've never heard of, and they see you working and they see the opportunity? How good does that feel, regardless of the size of the check?
I'm humbled every time I get a check. It doesn't matter what size it is. I feel incredibly blessed to have a community of people who support me. And a lot of the checks are coming from right here in Hutto. That's good as well. Um, so, you know, I was nearly in tears at our at a fundraiser event that I had um, on Tuesday. That the support was just overwhelming, and it raised more money than I was even hoping for. So I'm very grateful, and I take no one and no donation for granted. I hope I'm earning every dollar that comes to the campaign.
Excellent. And congratulations again, Stephen R. Harris. He is the mayoral candidate for Hutto, Texas. What's your website again?
HarrisForHutto.com.
And where can they find you on the Facebook or on social media?
Harris, well, good question. Stephen R. Harris for Hutto on Facebook.
Excellent. Well, again, best wishes. Please stay in touch and let us know how you do. When's the election?
Great question. March the 6th. Early voting starts February 17th, and the election day is March the 6th.
There you go, folks. An opportunity to make a difference right now. Doesn't get any better than that, does it? Again, thank you so much for joining us, folks. You've been listening or watching An Hour with the Candidates on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian National Committee. Joe Bishop Henchman, chairman, and of course, with my good friend John Gapso on the big board, who volunteers his service after a full and rewarding week at work, and we're grateful for it. I'm your host, Pat Ford. As again, I'm the proud chair of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. I thank you for joining us. We'll be back next Friday night, 9:30 Eastern. Watch for announcements on the Libertarian Party Facebook page. If for some reason you haven't liked the Libertarian Facebook page, please go out there and do that right now. There are wonderful shows all week now, a growing lineup of shows directed at a variety of concerns in and around the Libertarian Party itself, as well as our philosophy. It's worthwhile watching, and hopefully it inspires people to run for office. We'll see you next Friday. Have a wonderful week.